And this is our top story of the day, the latest inflation data supporting the narrative that inflation is easing. PCE, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, rising 2.6% on a core basis in June from a year ago. That's just slightly above expectations, and it leaves the door open for a widely anticipated interest rate cut in September. Yahoo Finance's Jennifer Schonberger has the details. Jen.
Hey, Jared. Good morning and happy Friday. That's right. This fresh reading on the Fed's preferred inflation gauge showed that inflation didn't pick up in the month of June, but didn't fall either. And this likely opening the door for the Federal Reserve to set the stage at next week's policy meeting for a rate cut this fall. Breaking down those numbers, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, known as the core Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, which excludes those volatile food and energy prices, showed inflation grew at 2.6% in June. That's 0.1% higher than estimates, and holding the level of 2.6% in May, but down from 2.8% in April. I will note this was also the slowest annual increase in 3 years. Still, the print shows, as I said, inflation is not picking up. This goes in line with the narrative that the Fed wants to see. The Fed wants to see more than a quarter of good inflation data. So this keeps a cut for September in play, while likely allowing Fed officials to look at data for July and August to ensure that inflation is still continuing to come down before they opt to cut rates in September. And indeed, we were starting to hear encouragement from Fed officials leading up to this number last week ahead of the blackout period. Officials encouraged by the latest inflation numbers in the second quarter. Fed Chair Powell himself said last Monday that inflation readings, quote, do add somewhat to confidence inflation is moving toward the Fed's 2% target. Those comments building on ones he said before lawmakers in the House and Senate that inflation numbers have, quote, shown some modest further progress and that more good data would strengthen our confidence that inflation is moving sustainably back towards 2%. Now, Jared, some investors think that the Fed has enough data to cut next week. That would be very much out of character for the Fed. They are being very cautious about this. They don't want to make the wrong move. Investors pricing in this morning odds of a 90% chance that the Fed will cut rates in September, with a second rate cut likely coming in their minds in December.